So, the Impact World Tag Team Champions, the Good Brothers, Gallows and Karl made their debuts in AEW last night on Dynamite, on the New Year's Smash Night 1 edition of Dynamite on TNT. They obviously continued their alliance with AEW World Champion Kenny Omega, which we've seen, of course, in recent weeks on Impact Wrestling on Access TV. But the really surprising element of it was when the Young Bucks, the AEW World Tag Team Champions, also came down to the ring and reunited in addition with Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. So the Biz Clears from New Japan Pro Wrestling are now fully in force across both Impact Wrestling and AEW. So what does this all mean? Well, first of all, if you're not aware of what I'm talking about, as I mentioned, last night's AEW World Champion Kenny Omega, he had an AEW World Championship defense against Rey Fenix in the main event of Dynamite New Year's Smash Night 1. Now, Kenny Omega retained his AEW World Championship, spoiler, but afterwards, Kenny Omega, after being goaded on by Impact Executive Vice President Don Callis, looked to continue his attack on Rey Fenix, but he was momentarily stopped by former AEW World Champion Jon Moxley. But then, out of nowhere, the current Impact World Tag Team Champions, the Good Brothers, made a surprise appearance. Not so much a surprise if you've watched any of the videos here on the channel, because I've been speculating on this for the last week or so. In fact, of the preview we did for New Year's Smash, and a video I think I did yesterday, I said that I felt they probably would show up on Dynamite this week, so it wasn't a massive surprise, but they made their AEW debut, a surprise appearance, and attacked Jon Moxley. As I mentioned, Omega has been working very closely with Karl and Gallows in recent weeks on Impact Wrestling. In fact, the trio, of course, will face the Impact World Champion Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Guns at Impact Hard to Kill on January 21. But what got really interesting, and certainly got what's got people talking, is when the Young Bucks came to the ring to question what on earth Kenny Omega was doing with the Good Brothers on AEW Dynamite that night. Now, the Varsity Blondes, Griff Garrison and Brian Pillman Jr., momentarily held up Kenny Omega against the ropes, but they were then super kicked away by Matt and Nick Jackson, and the show then closed with Kenny Omega putting up the Too Sweet hand signal, joined first by the Good Brothers, Gallows and Karl, and then slightly reluctantly at the start, but finally joined by the AEW World Tag Team Champions themselves, the Young Bucks, fully cementing a heel turn for the Young Bucks, and I guess a reunion, a reuniting of sorts of the club or the band from New Japan. Obviously, they're referring to Bullet Club, the alliance of Bullet Club in New Japan Pro Wrestling, without actually mentioning that name. Obviously, they've mentioned it on Impact here and there. I think they've probably mentioned it a couple of times on AEW Dynamite since its inception, but obviously they don't have the rights to use that name. It's the same reason why WWE use the term The Club or Balor Club when they're talking about that sort of stuff. We know which club they're talking about in New Japan, but it's a continuation of this interpromotional angle and storyline between Impact Wrestling and AEW, which kicked off in the Winter is Coming edition of AEW Dynamite back on December 2, 2020, where Impact executive and longtime Kenny Omega friend Don Callis helped Kenny Omega win the AEW World Championship from Jon Moxley on that show. And in ensuing weeks, we've seen this rivalry explode across both AEW TV and Impact TV, as we've seen Kenny Omega make various appearances on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, in addition to AEW President Tony Khan and AEW announcer Tony Schiavone. And this is the first real appearance that we've seen of going the other way. Of course, we've seen an AEW talent in Kenny Omega appear on Impact Wrestling. We've seen Tony Khan, AEW president, and Tony Schiavone, AEW commentator, appear on Impact Wrestling, but last night's appearance by the Good Brothers was the first time, apart from Don Callis, who of course is an executive vice president of Impact, but not really a talent. This is the first time we've seen a proper in-ring talent in Gallows and Anderson from Impact appear on an AEW show. So this is only the beginning. As I've mentioned, this is not really surprising because it had been expected, it had been reported, even since the inception of the AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover, that the Good Brothers were going to go over to AEW at some point. I even predicted it myself, as I mentioned yesterday and in the last couple of times I've spoken about the Good Brothers and the Kenny Omega connection and going over to Dynamite is something that I think everyone expected. Nevertheless, even though we expected to see it, it didn't take away from how good it was last night. I thought it was a very well done segment. Obviously, I thought maybe a bit too much chaos, but I thought the segment as a whole was good. We spoke about that in the news video we did earlier today, so be sure to check that out. But I think what we really want to talk about in this video here is, what does it all mean? I think what it truly means is there is way more to come from this Impact and AEW crossover. There just is. And Impact Wrestling and specifically AEW and Tony Khan are very good for leaving breadcrumbs, doing Easter eggs, hinting at what's going to come in the future without openly saying it. And Tony Khan spoke about it. Remember those paid ads? We've done a video for every paid ad that he's done on Impact Wrestling here on the channel. In one of those paid ads, one of the first ones, he spoke about tag teams in Impact Wrestling. Said, I know you've got a lot of tag teams here in Impact Wrestling. Maybe I should have a look at them. Now, I don't think... Obviously, in the storyline, I think he was trying to hint that he could take them away. But in reality, when you look at the Easter egg that he was leaving there, or hinting at, in reality, what he was saying was keep an eye out because a tag team from Impact Wrestling could be appearing in AEW in the very near future. That tag team, of course, was the Good Brothers. And now we have the Good Brothers make their first appearance for AEW last night. And even the Young Bucks spoke about it in a podcast interview. They did just after this AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover first happened with that Winter is Coming episode of Dynamite. The Young Bucks spoke about it on the podcast. They say, look, there's going to be some really exciting stuff. There's going to be some really interesting things. What does it all entail? We don't know yet. We haven't figured that out. And it looks to be at the moment that they're kind of figuring it out as they go along. But look at that image. Look at that image right there that was posted on social media afterwards. That is a massive reuniting of the club. It's something that I don't think many people thought we were going to see for a long time, maybe if ever, coming out of New Japan in 2016. Now, obviously, when we spoke about before and the reports speaking about the Good Brothers' involvement in this AEW and Impact crossover, of course they were going to have this alliance with Kenny Omega and sort of briefly reuniting the club on Impact side of things with Don Callis. But the discussion and rumour is that the Young Bucks would be facing the Good Brothers in a match. So what's happening there? I see some people saying, well, I thought they were going to be having a match, but now they're partners again, they're in a faction again, what's going on there? And I think the best response to that is that will come in time. That will come in time. When will it come? Well, realistically, why would you want to do that match right away, right now? I think possibly we could get the big match between the Good Brothers and the Young Bucks, possibly at Double or Nothing in May, or possibly even later than that at All Out in September. They're AEW's two big shows, and it should be on the biggest stage possible. It really should. Now, obviously, is that a long time away? May is 5 months away. September's 9 months away. Can they stretch it that long? Can they tell the story over that period of time? Of course they can. Of course they can. Let's build to it. Well, build to it. You could have a couple of scenarios that happened last night, right? You could have had the Good Brothers come in, the Young Bucks come out, say what's going on, and then you could have had Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers attack the Young Bucks straight away. And then you could have the match at, say, AEW Revolution in February, or the next maybe Slammiversary in July. Even that's a bit of a stretch, but you could have had the Young Bucks feuding with the Good Brothers immediately, have the match. It'll do very, very well. There'll be a lot of momentum. People would be excited. It would draw good ratings. People would buy the pay-per-view to watch it. It would make money. People would be excited to see it. Or you could do what I think they are doing now, in that you could have the Good Brothers come into AEW. You can reunite the Bullet Club, have Kenny Omega, Doc Gallows, Karl Anderson, Matt, Nick Jackson, the Young Bucks, Don Callis, and then you can have them as that faction riding very hard for a few months. You can have them appear on both AEW Dynamite and Impact Wrestling on TNT, Impact Wrestling on Access TV. Easy for me to say. You can have them do that. You can have them dominate both companies. You can have them take over the wrestling business, and you can have them just dominate everyone. And then later on down the line, you can do the split. You can have the momentum and have the match with all of that momentum because you've built it up over the series of months, over the course of January, February, March, April, May, maybe even into September. Who knows? But I think this is the better way to do it. I think this is the better way to do it because I think this gives them more time to tell the story. Obviously, it is a massive match of having the Bucks versus the Good Brothers. That is the match they're going to aim to, but doing it this way, giving a lot of fan service and having the club reunite and then eventually split up and then having the match, there's way more stakes and way more drama involved in doing that. So you have to remember what kind of business you're in here as well. This is a storytelling business, right? This is a storytelling. They tell stories. They entertain fans. They take fans on a ride and take fans through a variety of emotions. And there really is so much story to be told here because it's all based in reality. First of all, the big story and the big fan service is reuniting the group. For a while, people really didn't think that was ever going to happen. That core of the Bullet Club in New Japan, people thought that would never come back and be reunited again. They just didn't. Because you had the club in Japan, But then Gallows and Anderson leave in 2016 along with AJ Styles and Shinsuke Nakamura. They go to WWE. The Bucks and Kenny Omega, they stay in New Japan. But for a long time, I think most people thought, you know what, the only time or way we're going to see this really big reunion of the Bucks, Gallows and Anderson, Kenny Omega, Finn Balor, AJ Styles, etc. The only place we're going to see that is WWE. Because Gallows and Anderson, they're going to be under contract to WWE forever. That's where Finn Balor is. That's where AJ Styles is. We know WWE wants the Young Bucks. They want Kenny Omega. That's the only place that this big reunion is going to happen. And even Don Callis was involved in New Japan, right? I know he was in Impact at the time as well. He wasn't really a member of Bullet Club, but nevertheless, he was involved in that situation. So no one ever thought that that reunion possibly was going to happen. And if it did, it would have happened in WWE. So people legitimately thought, you know what, we might never see it again. We might never see it again. And then 2019 happened, and there was a chance that it could all happen. It could all happen, but instead, not in WWE, it could happen in AEW. Because look at the timeline. You have to look at the timeline, and it all starts with Gallows and Anderson's contracts expiring in 2019. Their contracts were expiring in 2019. They were with WWE, and they weren't happy. They weren't happy with the way they were being used. They weren't happy with tag team wrestling in WWE. They felt like they had come to WWE to make good money, and they'd been promised certain things and they hadn't been delivered. I mean, story of the life for most people that come over to WWE from another company, right? So, obviously, at that time, AEW has been announced at the start of 2019, but no one at the time really knows what AEW truly is. And there is lots of discussion about would Gallows and Anderson and AJ Styles, would they jump over to AEW? The problem was, we don't know what AEW really is at that point. We know that it's run by Tony Khan. He's a billionaire. He's got lots of money. I don't even know at the point that they were negotiating. Did they know that they were going to be on TNT? Possibly. I think they might have. So that was the situation there. And then the Young Bucks, they have conversations with Gallows and Anderson, and they say, look, this is the plan that we want to do. The original AEW Dynamite debut plans. Originally, the first episode of AEW Dynamite was meant to happen from Madison Square Garden. That's the first thing. Imagine the splash that would have made. But the ending plans of AEW Dynamite, that first episode, was to have the Young Bucks in the middle of the ring, then the debuting Gallows and Anderson come out of the crowd. They embrace, confront, whatever you want to call it, face the Young Bucks. It looks like they're going to do the Too Sweet, and then Gallows and Anderson just absolutely destroy them. A couple weeks later, once AJ Styles is free to make his debut, after he signs his AEW contract, he then makes his AEW debut, and then basically what you have is you have the Elite, you have Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks against another version of the club, WWE's version of the club, New Japan's version of the club, in AJ Styles, Gallows and Anderson. Of course, that never happened. That never happened. We saw the Inner Circle make their debut on the first episode of Dynamite in 2019. In reality, AJ Styles, Gallows, Anderson all re-signed 5-year contracts with WWE. Why? Because they got offered a lot more money by WWE. At the time that they were negotiating as well, they were doing a tour of Japan that happened to have them tagging with Triple H. Triple H says to their face, you're so desperately needed. We want to provide for you, for your family. If you go to AEW, you don't know what this company is. How long are they going to be on the air for? It's very uncertain. You don't want to put your family through something like that, all that uncertainty. That'd be terrible, right? That'd be awful. Why would you do that to your family? We want to provide for you and provide for your family. So they go, you know what? They're offering us more money. It's job security. They are a bigger company. AEW's uncertain. Sorry, guys, we're going to stay. And because of that, they didn't obviously sign with AEW. And legitimately, there was heat there. There was a lot of heat there because, and I understand both sides of the argument here when it comes to Gallows and Anderson and the Young Bucks. The Young Bucks side of it was, they're young guys, they're EVPs of this new company. They're still trying to prove their worth, not just in the ring, but on the executive side to the likes of Tony Khan. They're EVPs, and they felt like their friends, Gallows and Anderson, had let them down, and they had kind of built this first episode of Dynamite around them, and then it didn't happen. So there was heat there, but I understand Gallows and Anderson's point of view as well. Look, they offered us a lot of money. They're 5-year contracts. It's secure. We know the WWE is going to be there in 5 years' time. And we don't know what AEW truly is at this point. So I understand it. They said it was just business. There was a little bit of heat, a little bit of friction. That's what happened. They moved on. Well, fast forward, of course, to 2020, and then the world goes crazy because of the pandemic. Gallows and Anderson felt that they were lied to, and they were told they were safe and they were going to stay. They were factored in to Raw by Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon. But then they were released, of course, as part of the budget cuts associated with the pandemic. So I guess the question would be, once they got released, Gallows and Anderson, why didn't they go to AEW straight away? Why did they sign with Impact Wrestling? And to be honest, I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that one. Maybe there was some heat still there with the Young Bucks and with Cody and the guys in AEW. I don't know. Maybe they got a better offer from Impact Wrestling. Maybe it's just they wanted to keep their distance and they wanted to do their own thing first, establish their own stuff, whether it is Talking Shopper Mania on pay-per-view, whether it was all the stuff outside of Impact they do. Maybe it was they just wanted to go, you know what, let's do a couple of years doing our own thing. We've been shackled for so long. Let's do our own thing. We can go to AEW eventually. Maybe that's the case. Whatever heat that was there before, obviously it subsided because the Young Bucks also appeared on the first Talking Shopper Mania pay-per-view on Fight TV. So who knows? But I think everyone knew initially, or eventually rather, that the Good Brothers were going to go to AEW at some point. I think people thought it was going to happen much later on than this, certainly not while they're under contract with Impact Wrestling, but that's pro wrestling. Anything can happen, and the world and landscape of pro wrestling is constantly evolving and changing. So what I think is happening now is that you have this big reformation of the club. It dominates across two promotions, and then you have this eventual match later on between the Good Brothers and the Young Bucks, because it makes the most sense. Because them being the club again, first of all, that makes money. The Bullet Club was a license to print money in New Japan. Arguably, it's one of the most successful factions of all time. It is up there with the likes of the NWO, D-Generation X, Evolution, you can name them all. It really is that successful. Why? Because it's still going today, and people still talk about it today. People still buy the t-shirts today. Why? Because it's just that successful faction. So the fact that most of the original members, of course, I know Finn Balor's an original member as well, and some of the original members, Tama Tonga's still in New Japan himself, but most of the original members there, or some of the key members in the height of the popularity of the faction, are now back together. That's a license to print money for Impact, and it's a license to print money for AEW. So that's why they're doing the big reformation, because it makes sense. And then also, as I mentioned, you can now do this storyline of the Biz Cliz, the club, whatever you want to call them, taking over both AEW and Impact Wrestling. What a fascinating storyline that is. The club being dominant across two promotions, taking over the entirety of the wrestling business. It's always been a threat with factions over the years, isn't it? Oh, we're going to take over the business, we're going to dominate the business, but it's only in that company, isn't it? How about when you do it across two promotions? Because then legitimately you can put stake in the claim of we're taking over the entire wrestling business, not maybe WWE. They can maybe throw out some lines of going, AJ and Finn, you know what to do on the other side of things, to maybe say, you know what, maybe they're actually infiltrated WWE as well. They could really stoke the flames there. So they can really stake the claim that they are taking over the wrestling business because they're dominating both AEW and Impact. You have this faction across two big promotions. That's pretty big stuff. Plus, as I mentioned there, we spoke about it for a couple of minutes, that story about what legitimately happened between the Bucks and the Good Brothers in 2019 with those contract negotiations and coming over to AEW. There's a massive story to tell there. So rushing into that and doing the match straight away, you kind of negate telling that story, or you just assume that people know. And most people, I think, watching Dynamite would probably know that, but a lot of the casual fans might not know. So you have to tell that story because there is so much reality there and real life drama and real life heat from 2019. It doesn't make sense to not explain any of that. It makes total sense to really get into that, take your time, do a slow story tell of this. It makes sense to tell it all. So the money is there for a variety of levels. The money is there in having the club being together. There's money in the storyline of reuniting across two promotions. There's money in obviously having the match eventually with the Good Brothers and the Young Bucks. And the story of what happened in 2019. So there's so much really to get into, frankly, when it comes to the Bucks and when it comes to the Good Brothers and when it comes to this reformation of the Biz Cliz across two promotions. So I guess, and it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting. And the possibilities really are endless. One of those possibilities are the Young Bucks in Impact Wrestling, right? Obviously, they've got history there. They were part of Impact Wrestling 2009, 2010, 2011. I think that period of time. Definitely there in 2010. I think maybe 2011. They returned briefly for a one-night deal in 2013 as well. But they were Generation Me, Max and Jeremy Buck. And they have a ton of history there, and it could open up the possibilities now in the same way that Kenny Omega is regularly appearing in Impact Wrestling. Could the Young Bucks be the next AEW talent to be regularly appearing on Impact Wrestling? I think it's an absolute possibility, and at this point, to be honest, if they're going to be walking around as a faction, I think it's highly, highly likely that they appear in Impact Wrestling going forward, which would lead people to say, are we going to have some matches? Are we going to have Generation Me or the Young Bucks appearing in Impact Wrestling inside of an Impact Wrestling ring once again? I think they are. There is so much history in there, and there is a ton of possible opponents. Now, I won't go into what opponents I think the Young Bucks could face in Impact Wrestling, because I'm going to be dropping a video later today discussing that very subject, saying which superstars, which tag teams rather, could Impact have to face the Young Bucks inside of an Impact Wrestling ring, because there are some very exciting names there. Some really exciting names and some very interesting matches. So be sure to check that out. Subscribe bottom right hand corner, because that'll be dropping later today. So it's very exciting, and of course, it's only just beginning, because, as I mentioned, Kenny Omega, he's teaming up with the Good Brothers at Hard to Kill, and the Hard to Kill footage is being taped at the next TV tapings, which I would assume are probably happening next week, just prior to Hard to Kill. So there is still time. So there is certainly a possibility that in addition to Kenny Omega attending the next tapings when it comes to that Hard to Kill main event, also potentially the Young Bucks could be there with him. So we could see this BizCliz reunion on Impact Wrestling for several weeks to come, because we know Impact Wrestling tapes that TV for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. They tape them in a big batch, and then they'll come back in a couple of weeks and do the rest. So potentially we could have Gallows, Anderson, Kenny Omega, Don Callis, and the Young Bucks on an episode of Impact Wrestling for 4, 5, 6 weeks going forward now, which is incredibly exciting. In addition to that, I mentioned the Hard to Kill match next weekend, and I really, at this point, really wouldn't rule out the Young Bucks appearing at Hard to Kill, and during that match, maybe they might even play into the finish of it, who knows. And I certainly wouldn't rule out the Young Bucks appearing on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, and I certainly wouldn't rule out the Young Bucks having matches in Impact Wrestling going forward too. And I think they want to do that. They have history and they want to do that. I mentioned the podcast appearance they did when the first Impact and AEW crossover happened. They said, we want to face the Motor City Machine Guns. We want to talk about fantasy booking. We've already thought about fantasy booking in our heads as well. And they spoke about wanting to do matches against Impact Wrestling guys. So they want to do it too. So again, it really wouldn't surprise me. If we see the Young Bucks now eventually end up in Impact Wrestling for appearances, matches. Anything's possible. And as I mentioned, think of the storyline here. Think of the gravity of this storyline. A club made up of pro wrestlers from separate companies coming together and invading and taking over and infiltrating 2 major pro wrestling companies at the same time. Have we seen that before? Realistically, we've seen it for one company. We've seen the Outsiders come into WCW by the time they were signed to WCW. We've seen the invasion when it comes to the alliance of WCW and ECW coming into WWE, but ECW and WCW had folded and both been bought by WWE at that point. We haven't seen really 2 active companies and a faction take over both companies, as far as I'm aware. If not, you can let me know. I'm sure maybe in the Territory days they might have done something like that. Certainly in the modern era, we haven't seen something like this in a long time. So it's very exciting. It would be like having the Clique, right? Shawn Michaels, Triple H, X-Pac, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall. It'd be like having them as a faction, but appearing on both Nitro and Raw, all 5 of them, every single week. It would be insanity. In the late 90s. That's what it would be like. And maybe that analogy isn't exactly perfect, but that's what it's similar to me. That's how it's similar to me. So it's very exciting. And I've said numerous times here on the channel, so it's worth repeating, that I said that there was way more to come. There was way more to come when it comes to this AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover. And those reports of it being a one-off, not that intertwined, and this and that just aren't accurate. It's obvious that they're just not accurate reports at this point, because this is just the beginning. This really is just the beginning. It's the tip of the iceberg, and there is more to come with this storyline, and I'm very excited to see it. I think everyone loves this crossover. It's certainly picked up momentum again. AEW once again do a shocking go off the air angle involving Impact and AEW. Will we see some spillover now to when it comes to Genesis on Saturday? I wouldn't be surprised if we see a vignette. They're not going to appear on the show because I think Genesis has already been taped, but will we see a vignette? It's a possibility. Will we see a vignette or a promo with all 5 guys, or including 6, including Don Callis, on Impact next week. I think that's an absolute possibility. I think that's absolutely a possibility. And again, I think at this point, it's probably very likely that we see the Young Bucks at Hard to Kill next Saturday. I wouldn't rule that out at all. So we've barely scratched the surface. We've barely scratched the surface, and it's going to certainly be interesting to see what happens when it comes to the ratings for Impact next week, because if we have a Young Bucks appearance confirmed, which could happen over the next couple of days, it's what happened with Kenny Omega. We could have a Young Bucks appearance confirmed today, and if we do, we'll talk about it here on the channel. So if that happens, once again, I expect those ratings to go up, and I expect those Twitch streams to go up too. So it's going to be really interesting. It's fascinating. It's just the beginning, and it's very, very exciting. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the Good Brothers making their AEW debut last night and reuniting with the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, reforming the Biz Clears across 2 promotions? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.